I hadn't seen my daughter Hannah in 10 years. 10 long years spent building a life across oceans. In foreign cities, under the relentless sun of Singapore. Also, I could give her the life she deserved. I imagined that moment over and over, unlocking the front door of the Denver home I had bought for her, surprising her with a hug, and finally meeting my 4-year-old granddaughter Grace in person. But nothing could have prepared me for what I saw. The taxi pulled up to Cherry Creek Drive, and my heart swelled at the familiar sight. The red brick facade, the white picket fence, the oak tree Hannah had climbed as a little girl. This was the home I had worked so hard to provide, a sanctuary she could call her own. Hands trembling, I pulled my key from my coat pocket. I was a stranger on the sidewalk of my own dreams. The door opened silently, and a voice shattered the air like a knife. "Clean that mess up faster or you'll get another beating tonight." I froze. Through the hallway, I saw Hannah on her hands and knees, scrubbing the hardwood floors, her movements frantic, her shoulders shaking. A dirty apron clung to her frame, and the words on it made my blood run cold. Hamilton family property. My daughter, treated like property in her own house. And then I saw him. Huxley. My son-in-law, his cruel anger softening the instant he noticed me, replaced by a bright, practiced smile. "Dad, welcome home," he exclaimed, arms outstretched. What a wonderful surprise. Hannah was just helping out around the house. You know how she is, always pitching in. Hannah scrambled upright, shoving the degrading apron behind the couch. Her smile trembled and faltered. "Dad, I'm fine. Just tired," she said, her voice weak, brittle with fear. A small figure peeked from behind her legs. Grace? Her big brown eyes wide with curiosity and confusion.
"Mommy, who is that man?"
The word struck me like a blow. My own granddaughter saw me as a stranger, and my heart ached. I knelt, voice soft, trying to calm both of them and the storm raging inside me. "Hey, sweetheart. I'm your grandpa, James. We've talked on video calls. I'm here now. With you and Mommy. I've finally come home." Grace buried her face against Hannah's leg, trembling. Hannah's eyes met mine, filled with a silent apology, a plea for protection I would never ignore. I stood there, frozen for a moment, the weight of 10 years, the sacrifices, the miles, all pressing down on me. But one thing became painfully clear. They dared to treat my daughter like a servant. They dared to strip her dignity in her own home, and I would make them pay. I didn't move immediately. My mind raced, piecing together what I had just walked into. 10 years away, building a life for my family. And in my absence, this, Hannah reduced to trembling under Huxley's control. Grace afraid of her own grandfather. The sight ignited a fire in me I hadn't felt in years. I had promised myself I would always protect them. Now that promise had become a command. I stepped further into the living room, careful not to startle anyone. Huxley's smile was still plastered on his face, but it didn't reach his eyes. He leaned casually against the mantel, exuding the false charm he used to hide every ounce of cruelty. I could feel the tension in the air, sharp and dangerous, like a wire ready to snap. "Dad," Hannah whispered again, her voice barely audible. "Please, just don't." I shook my head slightly, signaling her to stay calm. I needed to understand the situation before acting. My daughter had endured enough fear already. One wrong move could make things worse. "Grace," I said gently, crouching down to her level again. "Do you want to show me your room? Or maybe your toys?" I tried to make my voice warm, steady, something a frightened child could trust. She hesitated, glancing at Huxley, then slowly stepped forward, hand in mine. That small gesture, fragile as it was, told me she remembered a safe presence. Someone who would never hurt her. Huxley cleared his throat, the edges of his smile tight. "I see you've met the family," he said, tone casual but edged with something sharp, almost warning. "Hannah's been keeping the place in order. You know how she is." I nodded slowly, studying him. Everything about him screamed control, manipulation, and entitlement. But the arrogance in his posture, the way he assumed dominance in a house that wasn't his, made one thing clear: he had underestimated me. That mistake would cost him. I let my gaze sweep over the room. The house, the very space I had bought with my blood, sweat, and sleepless nights, was organized, yes. But the subtle signs of subjugation were everywhere. Chores done obsessively, decorations arranged to please Huxley. Even the way Hannah moved with careful caution, as if she had to measure every step against his temper. I swallowed hard. forcing my voice to remain calm. But inside, my thoughts were already forming a plan. This wasn't about confrontation yet. It was about understanding, observing, and waiting for the right moment. Huxley had made the mistake of thinking he could control us all, and I would make sure he never forgot the name James Bennett. I knelt beside Hannah, brushing a stray strand of hair from her face. "I'm here now," I whispered, "and I'm not leaving. Not until you and Grace are safe. And no one dares treat you like this again." Hannah's eyes glistened. With tears she refused to let fall. I felt her tension, her fear, but also a flicker of hope, a spark I knew I had to nurture. Grace's small hand squeezed mine tightly, grounding me in the reality of why I had returned. This was no longer a homecoming. It was the start of reclaiming what was rightfully theirs. And deep down, I knew the reckoning would come. Huxley may have controlled the household for now, but James Bennett had returned, and nothing would stop him from protecting his family. Before I continue, from which place are you watching this story right now? Please subscribe and like the video for motivation. The following hours passed in a tense blur, though Huxley tried his best to keep up appearances. He hovered around the living room, offering forced smiles and hollow compliments, but I could see right through him. Every glance, every gesture, reeked of control, of someone who had grown accustomed to fear bending to his will. I stayed silent mostly, watching, listening, learning. This was no longer just about witnessing my daughter's suffering. It was about finding the cracks in his facade, the weaknesses I could exploit to reclaim our home and our dignity. Hannah moved around the house like a ghost, careful to avoid triggering Huxley's temper. Each chore she performed, each careful step she took, was a reminder of the years of oppression she had endured. But now, knowing I was here, her movements slowed, hesitated, small signs of courage returning. I saw it in the way her hands no longer shook as violently, in the way her eyes briefly met mine with a flicker of recognition and relief. Found Grace curled on the couch, clutching a stuffed bear, her tiny body tense. I sat beside her and let her come to me at her own pace. "Grandpa's here," I said softly, voice steady, calm. "I'm not going anywhere. You're safe now." She peeked up at me, eyes wide but searching, as if measuring the truth in my words. Slowly she leaned in, resting her head on my shoulder. That simple act, her trust, fragile as it was, hit me harder than anything I had experienced in the past decade. Huxley tried to maintain a sense of control, but his thin veneer of calm faltered in small ways. A twitch in his jaw, a hesitation when he asked Hannah to fetch something, the subtle shift in posture. When I moved around the room, all little cracks in the wall he had built around himself. I made a mental note of each one. Every detail mattered. That night I stayed silent, observing. I let Huxley believe he still ruled the house. I let Hannah see that I would not act rashly, that I was calculating, patient. The fire inside me burned steadily, a slow-building force that would not be denied. I remembered the long nights in Singapore, the sacrifices, the lonely hours spent working toward this very moment. All of it had prepared me for this. When the house finally quieted, I spoke to Hannah in the kitchen, away from Huxley's ears. "You don't have to keep hiding everything," I said softly, handing her a glass of water. "Whatever's happened here, whatever he's done, it ends now. I won't let him control you anymore." She swallowed hard. Eyes glistening with tears she refused to release. "James, I didn't want you to see any of this," she whispered, voice barely audible. I didn't want you to know how much I've suffered." I took her hands in mine. "You didn't have to suffer alone. I should have been here, but I'm here now. And nothing, no one, will make you feel small or powerless again. Not tonight, not ever." Hannah nodded, a tremor of relief passing through her. For the first time in years, I saw her straighten her shoulders just slightly, reclaiming a piece of herself that Huxley had tried to bury. I returned to the living room, where Huxley lounged, pretending everything was normal. I approached him slowly, deliberately, letting my presence fill the space. "James," he said, masking tension with his practiced smile. "It's good to see you back." I met his gaze evenly, voice calm but firm. "It's good to be back, Huxley, and I've come to make sure nothing like this ever happens in my family again." He laughed lightly, a hollow sound that did nothing to hide the unease flickering behind his eyes. "I think you misunderstand." "No, I understand perfectly," I interrupted, voice steady, unwavering. "I understand exactly what's been happening here. And it ends tonight. For the first time, the atmosphere shifted. Huxley's control, his false confidence, began to waver under the weight of my resolve. He had underestimated me, as everyone had, and that mistake was about to cost him more than he could imagine. I left the room slowly, letting him stew in the tension I had carefully built. James Bennet had returned, and every move I made from this point forward would be deliberate, calculated, unstoppable. The next morning, the house was quiet in a way that felt deceptive, as if it were holding its breath, waiting for the inevitable. Huxley had settled into his routine, believing his control was intact, unaware that every move I had made the night before was part of a careful calculation. I walked through the room slowly, letting my gaze linger on the subtle signs of subjugation. The way Hannah kept things perfectly arranged, the hidden chores tucked neatly behind the furniture, the little marks of fear she had carried in silence. Found Hannah in the kitchen again, cleaning dishes, hands moving mechanically, eyes distant. "Hannah," I said softly, placing a hand on her shoulder. She flinched at first, but the tremor faded when she recognized the firmness in my grip. "You don't have to do all this alone. Let me help. Let me handle what's yours to fight, not to endure." Her voice caught in her throat. I don't want him to get angry," she whispered. He's unpredictable." I shook my head slowly, anger simmering just beneath calm words. "He only seems unpredictable because you've let fear decide your boundaries. Tonight that changes. You'll see, Hannah. You won't have to hide anymore. You won't have to serve anyone." Grace peeked around the corner, clutching her bear tightly, watching me with curious eyes. I knelt again, offering the same gentle reassurance as before. "Your grandpa's here. You're safe. You can play, laugh, even make a mess if you want. No one will hurt you." Here, I could feel the tiny pulse of courage returning to both of them, fragile but unmistakable. I made a mental note. Protect this spark at all costs. Let it grow before confronting Huxley directly. Patience was my weapon now. Observation, timing, and strategy would be the downfall of a man who believed fear could be absolute. When Huxley finally appeared, lounging in the living room with a smug expression, I let a small smile touch my lips. Not warm, not friendly, but precise, calculated. He noticed. The shift in my demeanor unsettled him. "James," he said, voice light but eyes sharper, "you're really taking in the home after all these years?" I nodded, letting my gaze sweep the room, pausing briefly on the subtle marks of dominance he thought were hidden. "I'm taking it in," I replied evenly. "And I'm realizing something. This house was never yours to command, Huxley. Everything here belongs to my family, and I intend to make sure they know it and that you remember it." His smile faltered slightly, replaced with a flicker of unease. "Now, James, let's not— I think it's time for a change," I interrupted calmly. "A change in who decides how this house operates, who sets the rules, and who's safe in it." Huxley leaned back, pretending amusement, but the tension was palpable. I had planted the seed. He could feel the walls of his control beginning to shift, even if he didn't yet know the extent. Later, as the day stretched on, I subtly moved through the house, checking locks, observing routines, quietly ensuring that I had every advantage. Hannah watched me with wide eyes, a mixture of relief and hope shimmering in her gaze. Grace followed, sensing the difference in the air, feeling safe in ways she hadn't before, and all the while, I let Huxley believe he was still in charge, let him think he was untouchable. Every smile, every casual word I offered him, every step I took through the house, was a carefully measured move in a game he didn't even realize he was playing. That night, I finally spoke to Hannah in private, in her room where the faint scent of her childhood lingered. "Hannah," I said softly, "we're going to reclaim this home piece by piece. But first we need to be smart. We wait, we observe, and when the time comes, we act, and I promise, Huxley will never forget what it means to underestimate James Bennet." Her eyes glistened, as tears she had held back for years threatened to fall. I've waited so long for this," she whispered. "You don't have to wait anymore," I replied, voice low and steady. "Your life, your home, your family, you'll never be afraid here." Again, I left the room with my resolve cemented. Huxley had no idea the reckoning coming for him was already in motion. Every calculated move, every small step I took to secure my family's dignity and safety would lead to one undeniable truth. James Bennet had returned, and he was unstoppable. By the fifth day, The atmosphere in the house had shifted subtly but unmistakably. Huxley tried to maintain control, but every movement he made was measured now, cautious, because he could feel the change in the air, even if he couldn't yet name it. I let him think he still ruled, but every interaction, every glance, every word I spoke was a calculated test, a way to gauge his weaknesses. Hannah moved with a little more confidence now, her shoulders straighter, her hands less trembling. Grace laughed softly as I joined her in building a tower of blocks, the sound of her innocent joy cutting through the tension like sunlight through clouds. Seeing them like this reminded me exactly why I had come back. It wasn't just about confronting Huxley, it was about reclaiming what was theirs, restoring the life that had been stolen in my absence. Waited until late afternoon to make my first subtle move. Huxley was in the living room, frowning over some bills, his false calm like a fragile shell. I walked past him with Hannah trailing behind, quietly guiding her through her own home, letting her see that I was her shield and her ally. I placed my hand lightly on the back of a chair he had claimed as his own, and he stiffened ever so slightly. The smallest sign, but enough. I was starting to unsettle him. "James," he said, voice tight but controlled. "I don't know what you think you're doing." I smiled, calm, unyielding. "I'm not doing anything you can't handle," I said evenly. "I'm simply making sure my family is safe, and that includes reclaiming the respect they deserve." His jaw tightened, and I saw it, the first real crack in his armor. Fear, thinly masked by arrogance, flickered in his eyes. He wanted to lash out, to reassert dominance, but he couldn't quite summon the courage. I had planted the seed, and it was growing. That evening, while Huxley prepared dinner, I quietly instructed Hannah to gather important documents, proofs of ownership, evidence of payments I had made for the house, and anything else that confirmed she was the rightful owner. "Keep them close," I whispered. "Tomorrow everything changes." "You've waited too long. Now it's time for them to understand who they're dealing with." Hannah nodded, determination finally lighting her eyes. I'm ready," she said softly, her voice stronger than I had heard in years. Grace, sensing the shift in her mother, climbed into my lap as I reviewed the house, mentally mapping every route, every room, every weak point in Huxley's assumed control. This wasn't a reckless confrontation, it was a strategic reclamation. Every detail mattered. Late that night, I called Hannah into the living room, where Huxley lounged unsuspecting. "Hannah," I said quietly, "show him the truth." She reached into her bag and pulled out the documents. Huxley glanced at them, confusion flashing across his face before anger surged. "Where did you get those?" "What?" I held up a hand, calm, authoritative. "Everything you've claimed to control. Every corner of this house you've used to assert dominance. This proves it's hers. And she will not be intimidated or treated like a servant any longer. Not in her own home. Not by you." Huxley's face went red with fury. "You can't. This changes nothing." I stepped closer, letting the weight of my presence fill the room. "It changes everything," I said. "You've underestimated me, Huxley. You've underestimated this family. And now, the reckoning begins." Hannah straightened, a surge of courage behind her trembling lips. Grace peeked from the hallway, eyes wide but curious, sensing her family finally reclaiming the power that had been stolen. For the first time, Huxley realized he was no longer in control. Every carefully constructed illusion of dominance had begun to crumble. And I, James Bennett, was the force dismantling it piece by piece. The night stretched long, heavy with tension, as the first real battle of wills began, not with violence, but with strategy, clarity, and the undeniable strength of a father's love for his daughter and granddaughter. The following day felt like the calm before a storm, but there was nothing peaceful about it. Every glance Huxley gave me carried tension, every word carefully measured. He tried to maintain dominance, but the foundation of control he had built over the years was already crumbling. I walked through the house with quiet authority, observing, planning, and letting Hannah and Grace witness that their home was theirs again, one step at a time. Hannah moved with more confidence now, her hands no longer trembling as she performed chores, no longer shrinking under Huxley's gaze. I could see the strength returning to her posture, the spark of the woman I remembered before years of fear had dimmed it. Grace laughed from the corner of the living room, building towers of blocks without fear, secure in the presence of her grandfather, who would never let anything harm her. Approached Huxley directly that afternoon, in a way that was calm, deliberate, and unyielding. "Huxley," I said, voice low but sharp, You've had your chance to control this house, to intimidate my daughter, to hide behind fear. But that ends today." He leaned back, trying to project his usual arrogance, but it was cracked, unstable. "You think you can just walk in here and—" "I don't think," I interrupted. Stepping closer, "I know. I've watched, I've observed, and I've calculated every move. You've underestimated us for far too long. Hannah is no longer afraid. Grace is safe. And this house belongs to my family." I handed him a folder with every document, every receipt, every proof of ownership. His eyes flicked over them, confusion and anger mixing. But it was too late. His power had already begun to erode. Hannah, standing beside me, felt the courage I had nurtured over the past days crystallize. "This is my home," she said firmly, voice steady, no longer trembling. "Not yours, and I won't be treated like a servant here ever." Again, Grace peeked from behind her mother, her little hand holding Hannah's tightly, her trust in me and in our family growing with every moment. Huxley's face twisted in fury, a man realizing that every tactic of fear he had relied on was failing. "You can't just— this doesn't mean anything." "It means everything," I said calmly. Yet every word carried the weight of a decade of sacrifice and years of silent watching. "You've controlled through fear. That ends now. You'll respect this family, or you'll leave." For the first time, the house felt safe. The air, once thick with tension, seemed lighter, infused with the quiet but undeniable strength of a father who had returned home to protect his own. Huxley realized he was no longer the authority here. We were. That night, Hannah hugged me tightly, her whispered words barely audible. "Thank you, James." "For coming back." I held her close, the fire inside me finally tempered into a calm certainty. "You don't need to thank me," I said. "You've survived. You've been brave. I just made sure the world finally noticed." Grace fell asleep in my lap, her small breathing steady, her innocence preserved. And for the first time in years, I allowed myself a moment to breathe, knowing that the reckoning I had prepared for was almost complete. The final confrontation was near, and Huxley could no longer hide behind lies, intimidation, or fear. James Bennet had returned, and nothing would stop the restoration of his family's dignity. The day of reckoning arrived like a storm, gathering at the horizon, silent, inevitable, and unstoppable. Huxley moved through the house as if he still held power, but I could see it in every twitch, every strained smile, every hesitation. He knew the balance had shifted. The house no longer belonged to him. It belonged to my family, and tonight the truth would finally be undeniable. I gathered Hannah and Grace in the living room, letting them see my calm resolve, my unwavering certainty. "Hannah, Grace," I said, voice steady. "Today, this house, this family, this life, you will never have to fear anyone here again." Hannah's eyes shone with courage, Grace clinging to her mother but no longer trembling. The fire of hope we had been nurturing over the past days now blazed brightly. Turned to Huxley, who tried to mask his panic behind a thin veil of arrogance. "James, you can't— this isn't about what I can or cannot do," I said, stepping closer, letting my presence dominate the room. "It's about what's right. You've controlled this family with fear, but fear only lasts as long as we allow it. Today, that ends." Hannah stepped forward, the papers I had given her in hand. "This house, these documents, they prove everything," she said firmly. "You have no claim here. You have no power here. You've controlled me, terrified me, humiliated me, but no more. Leave, or we will make sure the law shows you exactly who owns this home." Huxley's face twisted with rage and disbelief, his false confidence shattered, revealing the weak, manipulative man beneath. This changes nothing." I smiled, calm and precise. "It changes everything. The abuse ends. The fear ends. Your reign in this house ends." Hannah's voice strengthened, bolstered by my presence. "And if you don't leave willingly, we will ensure you never threaten us again." Huxley's shoulders slumped, a man finally realizing the weight of his mistakes, the inevitability of his defeat. The power he had used to terrorize my daughter and granddaughter had evaporated. He looked at me, and in that moment, I knew he understood. James Bennet was no longer a man to be underestimated. He left, muttering threats that carried no weight, knowing that the family he tried to dominate had reclaimed their home, their dignity, and their lives. Hannah collapsed into my arms, tears finally spilling freely. "Thank you, James." "For everything," she whispered. I held her tight. You don't have to thank me, I said. You've survived. You've been brave. I only made sure the world finally noticed. Grace crawled into my lap, hugging my neck. Grandpa, she said softly. You stayed. I stayed, I replied, voice steady. And I'll always stay. This family is mine to protect. Now and forever. The house, once a place of fear, now breathed with relief, laughter, and hope. Every corner, every room, every shadow that had carried years of intimidation was filled now with light. I had returned from abroad, not just to see my daughter and granddaughter, but to reclaim what was theirs all along. And as I stood in the living room, watching Hannah and Grace finally free, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. James Bennett had come home, and no one would ever take that power from him or his family again.